Case studies. Now let's get into the juicy stuff. They may give you a case study either in person or to do as a take home, where in person or live, you have, let's say, 45 minutes, an hour. Typically, they'll give you a problem, you work through it, you can ask questions and clarify, and you work through the problem in front of them, you come up with a solution, and then you present it. And there may be small ones that are a specific optimization problem or a technical problem or a strategy or prioritization problem, or it may be pretty in-depth. You also might get a take home where you do it on your own and then bring it in and share it or present it so you have more time to think and you have more time to prepare. So for this, I'm going to walk you through an exact case study that I did for a real interview and ultimately got the job. So I believe it's a good example. It's one that's particularly broad and detailed at the same time. It was a lot more work than most case studies that I see. So I didn't choose this to share here because I think it is representative of most case studies. I think it's quite detailed, but I do think it touches on a lot of different topics, each of which could be topics that come up in case studies. So that's why I'm showing it here, because I don't think you're going to get one that is this in depth, but I think that you might get one that covers one of the topics covered here. And so therefore it can help to walk through how I was thinking about this and how I presented it. So the framing, first of all, for this case was select a software as a service product, and hopefully one that you use or that you know about, and then frame what the vision should be. If you are now the product manager for this whole product line or company, how would you frame the vision for the future? And then what's your strategy and what's your approach to bring that vision to life? And then take one problem within the product that the product solves and critique it from a design perspective and come up with an improved design of how you would make the product better. So that's the framing. For me, I chose Greenhouse as the case study for a couple reasons. For one, I've used Greenhouse extensively. It's an applicant tracking system, which means it's like a CRM for hiring managers or recruiters, where every time somebody applies to a job, they end up in Greenhouse, and then you can review the resumes there, you can approve, you can reject, you move people step by step through the interview process, you track feedback from everybody who talks to the person, and then ultimately you rate them and you decide if you're going to provide an offer or not, and you manage your entire pipeline of talent. And so I'd used it a lot. I'm also very passionate about this area. I like thinking about how to assess talent, how to interview, and how to help people get through interviews and get the most out of their career. Obviously, one of the reasons why I'm teaching this course. And I also have strong opinions about ways you could make it better. And so if you have an opportunity to select a company or select a product during a case study, pick something that you know something about and that you have a lot of interest in and that you have opinions on, because it'll make every other part of this easier. And so to start off with, the first part was vision. Set the vision. In order to do that, I began with the mission of Greenhouse. And I said, I am not going to reinvent the mission. I'm going to take the mission off the company website and use that as the anchor. And so the mission here is make every company great at hiring, because when they are, companies have the confidence to dream bigger, think bolder, and take on what's next. That's a great mission. And a mission is the outcome. That's the definition of success of what you're trying to get to. And then the vision is the visual manifestation of how you bring that to life and what it looks like when you do bring it to life. And so to have a vision, I needed to look at, well, what are all of the different things that are a part of HR's world? And HR controls many different aspects. One is recruiting, one is managing current employees. And there are a number of different systems and tools and features that they use or that they may use or that they're looking for. And so it's important from a landscape and a market competitive dynamics perspective to take a look at that first. So I created a visual here, very simple, to look at the landscape and what you're competing against. And it's important to understand that. And I just kept this simple. There's recruiting, there's managing, and then each box represents a product functionality or area or even company in some cases, so that we can think about where Greenhouse fits into the whole ecosystem. And the HR suite that covers all of these is quite broad, and that's an important point here, particularly because HRIS, or Human Resource Information Systems, which are the fundamental records of all the employees in a company. Almost every company in the serviceable market for this has an HRIS, And those HRISs will have a bunch of the different capabilities in these boxes. They may not have the best applicant tracking system or the best performance management system, but they may have those. And so as Greenhouse, you're competing against bundles, similar to how Microsoft will bundle Teams in with their Office suite, and then Zoom or Slack has to compete with a product that's being offered as a part of a bundle. And that's the same thing here with Greenhouse and HR software, and that's an important competitive dynamic to think about. And on the small to medium business side, it's mixed on whether they have real systems or they're just using spreadsheets. And then on the enterprise side, they have almost every one of these components, and those components are heavily integrated with the HRIS. So that's framing for how you're going to set up the strategy. And then in order to have a true strategy, you got to get one step deeper. Okay, who are the actual people? Who are the personas that we're solving for, and what are their problems, and how could we help them? So I created personas here, and part of the framing of this case was do an imaginary process in terms of user research and collecting data, and just describe what you saw as if it was real. In the real world, you'd take a lot of time to do user research and to do interviews and to collect data. You obviously can't do that as part of a case study. I was supposed to spend 2 to 3 hours on this case. I ended up spending 5 to 6. I have typically found when somebody says 2 to 3, you end up spending 5 to 6, and your competition, the other PM candidates, will also be spending 5 to 6. And so, to be honest, I would double whatever time they give you when you're managing your time and you're allocating how you're going to get this case study done if it's a take home. This was a take home where I took it home and then presented it. And so I'm not going to go through all of the boxes here because the point isn't necessarily to go into every detail of this case, but it's important to think through, well, if you have a strategy on a B2B product or on a B2C product, you need to look at the individual people that you're solving for, and they have different needs. And so I outlined the head of people, the HR generalist, the recruiter, the hiring manager, and then for each one of them, what are they focused on? What systems do they use? And what are their goals? And once you have that, you can come back and say, great, this is how we're going to approach our product strategy and our design. Looking at the market opportunity, I broke this down into SMBs, mid-market, and enterprise, so we can think about, well, on the enterprise side, they really need HRIS integration, or we can't play in that market. So how big is that market? Is it worth it? And then on the SMB side, they don't need any of those integrations, and they make really quick decisions because it may just be a small business owner with a credit card, and they'll just make a decision on the spot if they want to use your software or not. However, they have low budgets, and they don't need a lot of the software, and sometimes they're fine just with a spreadsheet. And so in the mid-market, it's a mix between the two. You're going to have higher budgets. You're going to have maybe an HRIS integration need, maybe not. And then it's medium in terms of the sales and marketing energy that's required, or the CAC, cost to acquire a customer. On the enterprise side, the CAC is a lot higher, but those customers are sticky and they have large budgets. Now moving forward, okay, given that, where do we want to play? And when we're looking at competing against bundles, it's important to say, how are we going to compete and how are we going to win? Slack wins against bundles because it has put so much energy into making it very efficient, and has a lot of integrations where people have used the Slack API to integrate Slack into all of these other components of their workflow. And so it's very hard to move off of Slack and use Teams, even if Teams is free with the rest of your Microsoft bundle. And so that's one way that Slack competes against bundles. And so here, my strategy was, well, they are already in applicant tracking systems. But if you look at recruiting and you look at managing, it's actually very similar how you handle performance management for your current employees, which is annual reviews and compensation and promotions, etc., and how you do an applicant review, because it's the same thing. You're taking skills and attributes and rating people based on performance in an interview or based on performance in the job. Also, there's an opportunity from a data perspective to say, well, a really interesting component of this is, let's look at Google. Google has a rare set of data and resources and time and money and engineers where they built an internal system that looks at every aspect they look at during the interview process and then looks long term at whether or not those correlate to success at Google. A long time ago, it was required that every college student, for example, had a 3.8 GPA, or you could not interview at Google. That was a filter. Over time, Google looked at the data and determined that that GPA was not a predictor of success at Google in terms of promotions and how long you stayed. And so they removed that requirement in the interview process. Now, not everybody can do that. But here with Greenhouse, you have an opportunity to say, well, actually, we can take all this criteria that people look at during the interview process and then connect it in your system to how you do performance reviews. And we can really tell end to end what is predicting future success. And we can help you from a benchmark perspective see what is normal in the market. You promoted 20% of your product managers. What is average? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it 5%? Are you grading too easy? Are you grading too hard? And what have other people seen in terms of predictors and what it drives success? You'd never give out an individual company's data. You'd never give you access to competitor information. But as a benchmark across the industry, we could take what Google did and what other companies don't have the resources to do and then democratize it, make it available to everybody, and use that data as a moat. A moat meaning a strategic way to defend what you built, so somebody else can't just say, oh, now we've built an applicant tracking system and we bundled it. Okay, fine, but we have all of this data about what works and what doesn't, and we built the AI around it to help you improve your processes, and now other people can't compete with that. So that was my strategy, which means you can expand the vision. We build software that enables companies to recruit, retain, and assess talent in a way that is less biased, more efficient, and more attractive to top candidates and employees. The mission I took from Greenhouse, and this is the vision that I expanded and set to say, actually, we could set ourselves higher here. So transitioning into the final part of this, which is, okay, now let's bring the strategy to life. Where are you going to invest your time and energy? I proposed 4 key initiatives. One around HRIS integration, one around simple, smart workflows, and then the bottom 2 on the AI side, automating and then providing actionable insights about how you improve your company. And we don't need to go into all of the details here, but part of strategy is how you win. And so for each of these initiatives, I had success measures, how you're going to measure your progress, a little bit of information about what it is and why we're working on it. Then I said what I would do next is create a pie chart of how we're allocating our energy and a roadmap, which is the sequencing of projects. And in my 5 to 6 hours, I did not have time to actually create a roadmap, nor did I have enough detail for a roadmap to truly be meaningful. In the real world, you would create a roadmap. And so in a slightly humorous way, I put a lock on this and said, yeah, hire me and spend 2 to 3 more hours on this, and this is the next step that I will take. And so I did not create the roadmap in the real world. I would have, and I did create the pie chart to give a sense of where we're allocating our energy and our effort, which is part of your strategy. So to transition from strategy to design, they also said take a problem that the product solves and redesign it and show how you're thinking about that. So from a product design perspective, first of all, what's the workflow? I outlined in its simplest form the workflow for applicant tracking. And you have the recruiter or the hiring manager, and then you have the job candidate. And the recruiter or hiring manager will write a job description. They will find candidates. The candidate will learn about the job, will apply to the job. Then the recruiter or hiring manager will review resumes, perform interviews, extend an offer, and then hopefully the job candidate accepts the offer. And so in its simplest form, I broke this down, made it visual, and then said specifically, this is the problem I am going to focus on, reviewing resumes. And let's break that down. Okay, in the product, in Greenhouse, this is the job dashboard. So this is an example. There's an automation engineer role that this company is hiring for. And if you go in to look at your pipeline, all of the candidates that are in process, this is where you land. And I have a bunch of problems from a design perspective with this page. So first of all, 60% of the screen real estate is dedicated to applications per day as a chart. I don't believe that that chart is meaningful or helpful or that it drives any behavior change. Then you look at the calls to action. There are 2 repeated calls to action, which is confusing. You're thinking, are these different? Should I click on one? Should I click on the other? What am I doing here? And you never want to have people thinking. You don't want to add cognitive load. So that to me is poor design. And then the pipeline itself on the right side, pipeline means how many people applied, how many made it through the resume screen, how many made it to the first interview, the next interview, the job offer. And so it's just like a sales funnel, but for your candidates. And the way this is visually presented, it's hard to tell if things are working or not. Are we getting 25% of resumes into interviews? Are we getting 25% of interviews into offers? Is it totally unclear? Do we have enough candidates in the pipeline, or do we need more? Or do we need to pause so that we can get all of them through the interviews? It's not clear here because it's not presented in a visual way where you can take in a lot of information quickly. And then when you look at the colors, they're really inconsistent in their color scheme, so I can't tell what is a link and what isn't. And generally, well-designed products will be very clear and consistent about the color scheme that they use so that you always know what's clickable and what's a link. And the navigation of this, taking a closer look, we talked about 2 CTAs. If you dig in, that first link there is actually a link back to the color scheme. And there's 2 different links with almost the same words, but just flipped. One that's application review and one that's review applications. And the first one goes to a list of applications where you could click through one at a time and go into individual candidates. And the second one goes to a wizard, which is a really efficient flow for flipping through one candidate at a time, taking some notes and saying move forward or reject. And that's a really efficient wizard. That's probably where you're going here. But this navigation was very unclear. You should either explain what that first one is and why you would go there and make it obvious that it's a link, or just get rid of it because you probably don't even need it here. The point of going to this page is likely to be able to move forward and then review these resumes as a flow. And so you dig in one level deeper and say, now when you click on an individual resume and you go to assess the resume, what does that screen look like? And this is what it looks like today. You open up a resume, you read through it really quickly, and then you can write definite yes or definite no or strong yes or no or yes in terms of moving this person forward. And you can either reject them or you can advance, which means they get to the next stage of the interview. And this is important for you to look at from a job candidate perspective because Greenhouse is a piece of software that a lot of companies use. And so this is likely what's exactly happening behind the scenes when you apply. And it comes back to your resume and why you want it to be simple and why you want it to be easy. They're going to flip through this, they're going to click a button, and they're going to move on to the next resume. They're not opening up this in their inbox and opening a PDF and scrolling through it and looking at all of the bullets. And so research and analysis, I put some fake user research here that was based on information that I had gotten from the past and then some fake data as well, but all of it is based on reality. And my key takeaways were recruiters and hiring managers use this software a lot. Some companies have high demand, and meaning a lot of candidates, and they'll review 10 to 50 candidates at a time, which is its own unique workflow. And then some are reviewing one at a time as they come in because they don't have as much flow. And then hiring managers struggle with the navigation because they don't use the software every single day. And so they're not power users because sometimes they're hiring, sometimes they're not. But the recruiters are in there all the time. It's a key part of their job, and they're quite efficient with it. And then few companies have structure in their resume review, meaning people just go on the resume, they decide what they're looking for, and they click yes or they click no. Whereas in interviews, people have a lot of structure. Here are 5 criteria that we're grading people on, and that's how we're going to decide if we make them an offer. Whereas the resume, it tends to be just people licking their finger and sticking it in the air. And then nobody cared about applicants per day, and the pipeline was confusing. So I use all this as user research to say, great, now I can learn what I'm optimizing for so that I can have a good design. And from a data perspective, looking at the fake data, I said, well, I found out that there was racial and gender bias in resume reviews versus the interviews, because I've seen this exactly in other companies where they have a lot of structure in their resumes, a lot of structure in their interviews, and they look at particular criteria. They use the same questions, the same case studies, they benchmark. And when they look at race and gender and those applicants, they have very similar flow-through rates across these different factors. But in resume review, the race and the gender tend to be in a situation where there's bias, meaning some races and some genders get through at different rates, which means that you don't have enough structure in the resume review, which leads yourself to bias, either conscious or unconscious. And you need to be able to put in structure to prevent that. And then also some information about potential usage patterns. How frequently do people use this? How much time do they spend in it? What are their click patterns? That helps you understand, okay, how would we reframe the design? Now, what are the goals of resume review? I said, filter out resumes that clearly don't meet requirements. That's your initial filter. Get rid of candidates that are irrelevant. Then identify top candidates as quickly as possible. You want to reduce the time it takes when you have an open position from posting the position to hiring a great candidate. So if a great candidate comes in, you want to push them through the process as quickly as you can. And then the final one is to create a process that reduces bias. So applying that to the dashboard page, we think about the design. What are the goals of the design? Well, first of all, you want to drive action. You want one clear CTA. application review. Just go through the wizard. And then also I said, let's highlight any other areas for focus. It could be different reasons, but just pull out things that you need to know about. One example is a candidate has had an offer for 3 days without a response. You should be responding to that. And then let's just inform you how many applicants have come in over the past week and what's the current state of the funnel so you can visually look at it and just understand how you're doing. So V2, and I told you earlier in this course, I am not a world-class designer. I'm not pretending to be one or trying to be one. This is how I put this together in terms of how I would think about redesigning the page. And then in the real world, I would work with somebody who could make this very visually appealing. But my factors were, let's start with one clear CTA. It's the first visual on the page, and that's the main thing that you click. By default, that's what you're doing. And it shows you how many applications there are. And then urgent alerts for specific things that have come up, like I mentioned. And then a visual pipeline where you can just look at it and you can see how many applicants came in last week, what's the delta versus the previous week, and how is the whole pipeline looking. And now what are the goals of the resume review page? So that was navigating and flipping through resumes. Now one step deeper on this page, Greenhouse focuses heavily on setting up criteria when you interview. Here are the 5 criteria. We're measuring communication skills and problem-solving skills and collaboration and empathy, etc. Every company sets up their own factors, and then you can grade individual candidates during an interview on those factors and then decide how to handle the candidate. However, in the interview, the resume stage, there's no criteria here. It's just yes or no. And so that's really subject to creating bias. And I think that we should put structure in here. My hypothesis is that just plain text feedback and approve reject is creating a big problem. And so I am recommending, and this is my design, not the current state of Greenhouse, is to add criteria to the resume review where you can just grade on a slider 1 to 5 and look at things like relevant experience or signs of progression, whatever it is you're looking for in your resumes. Each company could create their own criteria, but create criteria, grade it, and then advance it. I also find it makes grading resumes easier because a lot of people get gummed up in resume review and aren't sure how to handle a candidate. This could make it faster and more efficient. And then at the end, you could test, did it reduce bias? And did it reduce the time and energy that it took? That would be signs of success. And then you pull all this together. So it was the vision, it was the strategy, it was a product design problem. If you're doing a case study, you'd probably get one of them and not all 3 of them tied together in one. This one was heavy duty and took a while, but I think each of them are highly relevant factors. And I finished with an HR tech landscape just to frame, this is a really competitive market. And there are a lot of people doing a lot of things. It's good for you to know about these landscapes because you can Google them on the internet. They used to be called Lumascapes because Luma Partners, an investment bank, famously came up with the first version of this during the internet advertising days to help people understand all of the different players and where they fit in. And there are landscapes for software as a service or for marketing technology or for sales technology and CRM, all of these different players, AI, and it's a nice way to understand competitive dynamics for a company. It's also a nice way to get a list of a whole bunch of companies and you can research them individually and find ones that you're interested in applying to jobs for. So that's how I wrap this up. Now, some key takeaways that you can apply to case studies in general. So first of all, organize your ideas. You saw how I put together the HRIS functionality for when you're recruiting and for when you're managing talent. It was just a simple way to structure it so you can take a lot of information and break it down in a way where you can show somebody the strategy and they can say, oh, okay, yeah, that strategy makes sense. And it's a way to simplify, it's a way to communicate. Think about visual ways that simplify. You could do this on a whiteboard, you could do it on your own, or you could just think through it and articulate it. But having a way to abstract all the information so you can explain it is key. And then if you're prioritizing, have frameworks. If you have a priority problem, what are the goals and what are the factors that you're considering? So what's the criteria that you're using to make a decision? Never just say, well, I'm going to prioritize this. It's always, well, I'm thinking about these factors and therefore I'm prioritizing this over the other things for these reasons. Why? Then manage your time. It's tricky in interviews, particularly if it's a live case study, where sometimes it may be clear you have 20 minutes to work on this or you have 40 minutes to work on this. If it's not clear, don't be afraid to clarify and say, okay, great. How much time would you like me to spend on this just so I can manage it accordingly? You never want to spend 20 minutes on a problem you're supposed to spend 45 minutes on because you probably won't get into depth. You also don't want to spend 45 minutes if they only wanted you to spend 20. And always make sure that you get to a solution. It's okay if you simplify, if you make assumptions. You're going to have to make simplifying assumptions along the way, likely. And you can ask questions, you can clarify, but always get to a solution because it's your job to manage the clock and make sure you're not halfway through some process that would have taken you an hour if you need to have an answer. Ask questions. Do this carefully. Read the interviewer a little bit. There are some situations where I've asked interview candidates questions where the whole point was they don't have enough information. And I've told them you can ask me any questions you want. And if they proceed without asking questions, they're basically going to fail the interview because the purpose of it is to tell them that they can ask questions, then give them not enough information, and they have to ask and they have to be relentlessly curious and they have to figure out what are all the dynamics of the situation, and then they can come up with a strong solution. Now, there are also situations where hiring managers think you have all the information you need. This tends to be more towards something that's really well framed or really specific. However, you may come across this. And so ask questions, but read the interviewer as you do, because you'll probably be able to tell if they want you to be asking questions or if they just want you to take it and solve the problem. And specify your assumptions. So frequently in these case studies, you're going to need to make assumptions. And it's okay to make assumptions, just tell them what you're talking about. So if you're doing a case study on an e-commerce site, you may say, I'm going to assume that average order value is around $100. Now, I would have a different approach if it was 10 or if it was $1,000. But for the sake of this, I'm going to assume it's $100. And then if you got new information, you could adjust your approach. And so it's one fundamental approach with assumptions where later on you can change your answer if the assumptions change. And that's a great way to handle product management, therefore a great way to handle interviews. And a few other examples of types of case studies that you may get so that you're aware. There are estimation problems where Google used to be famous for this. How many golf balls could fit in a bus? I got asked that question one time during an interview. I think they're a little annoying, to be honest, a lot of times. But what they're really going after is, can you think on your feet and can you put together an equation and understand the different components that go into it? And then can you come up with a method for making guesses? And then can you sanity check it to see if you're probably in the realm of reality or not? And then can you adjust and get a little bit closer? Then there's optimization problems where you may look at an entire system and you need to understand the interdependencies so that you can make a suggestion of how to approach it. Then there's prioritization problems. Here's 5 things. Which ones should we do and why? This is all about your framework and your trade-offs and your criteria. There may be technical problems. Here's a data problem where you have to understand APIs and how data flows back and forth between systems. You don't have to be an engineer, but you may have to understand things like rate limiting of API calls and how many API calls you can make per second, or a little bit of how you structure data. You may need to understand how different systems connect together. You rarely see algorithms. I have in Google interviews specifically seen Big O, which is how efficient is this algorithm? And in computer science, you can understand some of the Big O problems and figure out from an algorithm where it is. And that's the only situation where I've seen that. I also think they're leaning away towards that a bit. So I don't think you have to worry about super technical interviews, but very specifically, if you're interviewing at Google or a place where you know it's highly, highly technical, you may want to brush up on some computer science topics. And then project and execution is a type of case study where it may just be, here's a project, how would you execute it? And this is about laying out a plan. It's about identifying risks. And it's having attention to detail. Strategy is similar to the one I went through, where it's pulling it all together: customers and markets and opportunities and creativity and vision and why. And so at the end of the day, all of this is, can you really look at a product? Can you look at a customer? Can you look at a problem? And you can figure out, here is a really great approach. Here are some risks. Here's how I would mitigate that. And here's my approach. And so you can't predict what kind of case studies you're going to get, but I can arm you with some of the tools so that you can go in there and handle them to your best. And they're likely to give you a case study that's either relevant to that product and that company, or in a lot of situations give you a choice, such as the software as a service example that I use Greenhouse for. And in that situation, you get to use a little bit more of your creativity and have a little fun with it. So at the end of the day, these are puzzles. being a PM is about solving puzzles. So try your best to have fun with it because it is exciting, it is exhilarating, it is interesting, it is fun, it is a challenge. It's like running through an obstacle course. And so just get yourself in the mindset of, here's an obstacle course, I'm ready for it, let's roll. And once in a while, you're going to fall on your face, and that's okay. You get back up. You're not going to only have one shot at this in life. And you'll get better as you go through it. Running through the obstacle course, interviewing for PM jobs is a distinct skill. And the more you do it, the better you will get at it. But I'm trying to make it so that the first time you go in there, you're as armed as possible to be able to handle it. So good luck.